Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series. This is May, and this month we're focusing on STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities, research, practice, and resources. The Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series is a collaboration of Education Northwest and the National Mentoring Center, Friends for Youth, the Indiana Mentoring Partnership, Mentor Michigan, Mentoring Partnership in Minnesota, and Oregon Mentors. And for those of you who've been on our previous Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, you'll see that we are adding partners as we go. So it's very, very exciting that we are growing. And we're excited to have you here to join us this month. And if we go to the next slide, just for all of you to know, if you've been a part of our webinars, you'll know that you'll get an email, a follow-up email after the webinar. That includes how to access a PDF of the presentation slides and the webinar recording, a link to the Mentoring Forum site for resources, contact information, and other chances to continue the conversation about today's topic. And it would really help us out if you take a few moments to complete a very, very short 5-question survey as you exit the webinar. Also, as we go through today's webinar, you can participate by the chat panel, asking questions and your comments. My name is Sarah Kremer. I'm Program Director here at Friends for Youth's Mentoring Institute, which is in Northern California. Today on our webinar, we are also being joined by Amber Troop, who is Director of Mentor Michigan. Hi, Amber.
Hi, Sarah.
And Amber will be our moderator for today. And we have April Reardon, Director of Training and Community Partnerships at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota, who is helping to drive our webinar today. Hi, April.
Hello.
Great. And also we have a couple other people participating kind of on the back end. Candace Singleton from the Indiana Mentoring Partnership is going to be monitoring your questions. Marissa Wilkins from Mobius Mentors in Vermont is monitoring the chat panel. And we also have Ashley Bemmels from the Mentoring Partnership in Minnesota, who is tweeting about our webinar today. So we really want this to be a participatory experience. It's a chance for you to interact with experts and peers in the field of mentoring, and especially on this topic today. If we go to the next slide, you can see here's how we want you to participate. The best ways. Everyone is muted just for the best sound, but you can type in your questions and comments in the question box, and we will be reading some of those questions and comments aloud. And we may invite you to raise your hand during interactive activities, and that's a little button that you see on your screen in your control panel. Just raise your question and we'll know that you've raised your hand. Okay, so we're going to start with just a couple polls. The first one, how would you describe your experience level in the youth mentoring field? Either new or beginner, experienced, or expert. This gives us a chance to see who's participating on our webinar today, just so we know how to focus some of our questions and some of our comments. So we'll wait just a few more minutes. We've got almost everyone voting. And okay, looks like we've got enough people here. And here's who we've got today. We have 56% of you are experienced, 36% are consider yourselves new or in the beginning stage, and 8% experts. So welcome to all of you. And our second poll, these are two that we do pretty much at the beginning of every webinar. What's your role within your organization, the kind of work that you do? Do you work in a mentoring program? Are you a researcher? Are you a funder? Or do you work for a funding source? Do you provide training and technical assistance, or anything else? So if you could just let us know, that would be very helpful. It also gives us more information about how to focus today's questions and comments. So go ahead and vote for your choice. Let us know who you are. And looks like we've got just about everyone voted. And now let's see. We have 56% who work in a mentoring program. 20% of you are researchers. 16% provide training and technical assistance. 8% other, no funders. No, that's too bad for today, but thank you everyone for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to turn everything over to Amber, who will walk us through this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So today we're pleased to be featuring two researchers on this webinar, and they're going to review some research and literature about STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities, as well as some research about other types of mentoring for youth with disabilities, and then also STEM mentoring for girls and other racial or ethnic minorities. Once we do that, we're going to switch over to a practitioner who will also be a panelist on here to share what his program does and also respond to questions. Like Sarah said, we really want this to be interactive, so please feel free to type questions into the question box at any point in time, and we'll do our best to get those answered by our panelists. Even if we don't get those live, we can continue the conversation after today's webinar through the forums and through Twitter. And if we didn't mention it already, the hashtag for Twitter is #MentorWebinar. So we have three panelists today, and we want to hear from all of them. So we're going to get right into the meat of the webinar for today. And for our first panelist, I'm pleased to welcome Lori Powers. And Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk through a few slides about your research, along with Joanne Sowers, who is also an expert on this topic.
And I think, Joanne, you're going to get us started.
Yeah, I'm going to get us started. Hi, this is Joanne. I wanted to pre-apologize if I start coughing. I have a bit of a raspy throat. We really want to thank you for joining us today. Sarah said that a focus group who is really interested in STEM mentoring, and we're really appreciative to the collaborative for giving us this opportunity to dialogue about mentoring for youth with disabilities, particularly in the area of STEM. I do want to put a little footnote to the introductions. Scott at DoIT is certainly a program representing DoIT and his colleagues there who do a lot of practitioner work. They also have really done much of the seminal work in the area of research in STEM mentoring for youth and young adults with disabilities. So Scott will be able to share some of the work that they've done also. A bit of a background related to why we're interested in this particular area is that government and private sector businesses have been real concerned and continue to be concerned about the shortage of individuals who work in the area of STEM and the growing need for people to fill these areas so that America can remain competitive in the growing decades. Excuse me. There are a number of groups, as also was said in the introduction, who have been significantly underrepresented in STEM historically, and really as government and industry have recognized, really are an untapped talent pool for filling these needs. Our work that Lori and I've done, and Scott at DoIT, has been funded by the Research and Disability Education Program. And we're going to advance the slides, guys. Hello?
You got it?
Joanne.
Hello?
Joanne. Where do you want? Where did you want
okay,
to go?
good. I'm sorry. I thought we had the first technology problem.
No.
So the work that Lori and I have done over the last few years and have done a research study on STEM mentoring for young folks with disabilities. And the monograph that we're going to spend most of our time talking about today has been funded by the Research and Disability Education Program at the National Science Foundation. And the goal of RD is to increase the number of young folks with disabilities who choose and pursue STEM post-secondary education and careers. Mark Letty, who's the director of the RDE, who we're hoping was going to be on the webinar today, has shown really great leadership in encouraging high-quality research as well as demonstration and outreach projects to encourage young folks with disabilities to go into STEM fields and to understand that they have the capacity to do that, and that STEM fields offer exciting, fulfilling job opportunities to aspire to. Based on the available research in youth mentoring in general and in some research that has been done with youth with disabilities, not particularly in the area of STEM, has suggested to RDE and to other folks that mentoring is a promising practice, holds promise for encouraging youth with disabilities to go into STEM fields. Scott at DeWitt and his colleagues there, as I said before, really have a long history, I think almost 2 decades of doing this work. And all of us, Lori and I, have a fairly long and extensive history of doing mentoring research for folks with disabilities. I always want to kind of put the proviso on there when I say research, that the kind of research that all of us have been involved with is really programmatic and community-based. So if you came and kind of looked at our research projects, it would look like a mentoring program that probably many of you are running out there today.
We thought we'd pause here too to do a quick poll just to see how many of our participants are providing mentoring in the STEM area. You could take just a moment to take this quick poll. It'll give us a good sense of what our participants are already doing in this area. All right, April, it looks like we have a good representation in our poll, and we'll show our results here. 27% of you said yes, which is exciting. 43% said no, and some of you aren't sure. So hopefully through this webinar today, you'll find some ideas about how you can incorporate some of this work into your mentoring program.
Great, and hopefully, I think somewhere in the slides and in the advertisements that went out, we're sort of throwing around the word STEM, and for those of you who are maybe not doing a lot of STEM stuff, you probably already know this, but STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. So the next slide
Joanne, there might be a slight delay from what you see on your screen, but just keep going, and it'll be there.
Super, thank you.
You
so
bet.
Sort of playing off a bit of what I was saying before the poll is about the work that we do and doing it in a community-based programmatic way. This is a picture of Minty and his mentor in the STEM Mentor Research Project that Lori and I have been doing for several years, and it's entitled What Matters. This is really what it's all about actually out there in the field, and this young man is helping his mentor here at PSU do a green energy car building project. So again, as we've indicated, Lori and I have been doing this research project, which Lori or I will probably touch on as we're going through the monograph and the review of the literature that we've done. And in addition to being funded by RD at NSF to do the research project, they also asked us to do a literature review and write a monograph of basically the state of STEM mentoring and mentoring in general for youth with disabilities. This slide here gives you a bit of an overview of how we went about doing that. We did a pretty extensive search of the literature on mentoring that was database for young folks between the ages of 14 and 30. We looked at a number of different research areas, obviously STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities, also at mentoring for youth with disabilities that wasn't focused on STEM, STEM mentoring for other underrepresented groups, and then did a little bit of pulling out some of the major studies and meta-analysis of the research for the general at-risk youth mentoring. We did that and couldn't do an extensive review of that, but did it in a way to inform the other literature that we were looking at. Again, RDE alliances that do it, and Scott and his colleagues there are called an RDE alliance, and Scott will share some more of that with you, and they have done a lot of work and great resource for those of you who are interested in STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities. We looked at the methods, and we looked at the outcomes that were being reported by the studies. We're also looking at the mentoring program characteristics and mentor-mentee characteristics and how matching was going on. So I'm going to start now talking about some of the big findings, and then Lori will take over from there. And I'm just going to talk about, first of all, kind of the big takeaway, is not surprising to everybody, is that there hasn't been a huge amount of research in this area, in particular in STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities, and even in other areas of mentoring for youth with disabilities. And there's a particular need for research that is really use more rigorous research methods. You know, lots of good outcomes have been reported in the literature, in the research that has been done, but the extent to which we can really say that mentoring caused those outcomes is a little difficult to say at this point in time. And there's a real need for experimental and quasi-experimental and other types of rigorous research methodologies. And in particular, a real need to look at what are the characteristics of the mentoring programs, such as matching. How does different kind of matching approaches of mentors and mentees work that really increase the effectiveness of mentoring, and also longer-term outcomes, doing longitudinal studies to look at the extent to which it really does impact those things that government and business is really interested in. So Lori?
Joanne, could you take a moment to just give a little bit of a definition to what you mean with regarding youth with disabilities? Specifically, what type of population are you referring to?
Yeah, typically in the literature, when we talk about youth with disabilities, those are youth who have received a individual education plan in their school district, or what's called a 504 plan. So from a federal and state perspective, those are individuals, youth in particular, who have been gone through an assessment process and meets the criteria for having a disability. That includes, we use that term in a generic sense, and certainly from the federal government, what that also means are folks who have a wide variety of disabilities, youth who have certainly physical disabilities, who may be blind or deaf, but also includes folks who have emotional issues and who have learning disabilities and ADHD, and who are on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, and those kind of things. So it's, when we're using that term, it's really a pretty broad-based term.
Great, thank you.
Okay, hi everybody, this is Lori, and what I'm going to do is give you the 30,000-foot version of what some of the key findings are that we drew as a result of reviewing the research and preparing the monograph. And the monograph will be available for you to take a look at if you want to look at some of the specifics behind the findings that I'm talking about. So the first and perhaps the most important finding is that STEM and other mentoring as well has positive benefits for young people with disabilities. And to some extent this may seem like an automatic, well, why not? But we know that there are lots of folks out there, and there are mentoring programs sometimes that might wonder, will mentoring really, will we be able to do right by young people with disabilities? And clearly the literature says yes. There are, for some of the broad-based mentoring models that have been looked at, some of those effects are on the smaller side, and what we find is that as the studies tend to focus on more kind of targeted forms of mentoring, and they focus on at-risk groups in particular, that you see those effects going up, being a little bit higher. But the important take-home is that STEM mentoring and other mentoring is great for young people with disabilities, and important to include folks. The second point is that when we look at the outcomes related to STEM mentoring and really other mentoring, forms of mentoring as well, it's pretty clear that mentoring is associated with increased confidence, increased knowledge, and increased engagement in STEM and in other areas. And there's less information known about the effects of mentoring on longer-term outcomes, but we really do, I think, have growing confidence that mentoring is associated with increased confidence, knowledge, and engagement in the area. The next finding is that young people with disabilities benefit from STEM mentoring, whether it's provided by mentors with or without disabilities. And this is an important point, because I think a lot of us at one time or another have also wondered whether would we need to match a young person with disability with a mentor who has a disability? And the research, and we're honest in saying that there's not been a lot of research. The study that Joanne and I are doing has specifically examined that in an experimental way. And then there are other studies that I think allude to the same conclusion, that young people with disabilities benefit either way. And that's not to say that that there might be cases in which a young person with a disability, just like a young person who's racially or ethnically diverse, might benefit from having a mentoring with shared life experience. But overall, it's a good thing for youth with disabilities, regardless of whether the mentor has a disability or not. The next point is that, and I'm guessing that this will make intuitive sense, is that the studies clearly show across the board that mentors who are strengths-oriented and who foster positive relationships with mentees are the most effective mentors. And I won't spend much time on that, because I think we all know that. The final point on this slide is that we spend a lot of time, I think, talking about, well, what is the most effective part of mentoring? Is it the relationship piece? Is it the teaching that mentors might naturally do with mentees? What is it that's most important? And we've concluded that, looking across studies, that really underlying much of what seems to be effective mentoring are activities that mentors and mentees do to have different experiences, provide the mentees with different kinds of experiences, and then sharing information in the context of those experiences. So getting out, doing things together, having fun and learning seem to be very important for effective mentoring. Now we could go to the next slide.
And Lori or Joanne, before we move into the next slide, I know we have defined STEM and we all understand what mentoring is, but could you give a little bit of explanation about what you mean by STEM mentoring?
So this is Lori. So STEM mentoring would be where you would either match, depending if it's individual mentoring, match a mentor and a youth, or if it's group mentoring, bring mentors and youth together, or if it's e-mentoring, connect in one way or another, with a program goal that the focus is on enhancing young people's knowledge, aspirations, and involvement in science, technology, engineering, math areas. So it's mentoring that has a goal around STEM development.
Great, thank you.
Sure, sure. The first bullet on this next slide is really just meant to say that although there's a lot of discussion around the question of if mentoring is short-term, can it really be effective? We've concluded from our review that actually the answer is yes. That shorter-term mentoring, and that means mentoring less than a year, as we're thinking about it, really can be effective if the mentoring itself is focused and there's a kind of a consistent process that's used. So in a sense, kind of the tighter the mentoring experience is, it may be that it doesn't necessarily have to happen for long periods of time, beyond a year. So that just might be effective as programs are thinking about design. I will say, though, that we are not saying that mentoring for more than a year isn't good. There's a lot of literature that confirms that it is. We're really saying that under certain conditions, mentoring for less than a year can be effective. And then the second point here on this slide is that when we think about matching, the question is really, well, what seems to make for the best match? And in general, the research suggests that actually personality and shared experiences and interests, which may not necessarily be, in the case of STEM mentoring, matching a mentor and a mentee who might have interest in, say, both interest in engineering. That may actually be less important than the fact that there's certain commonalities that they have in their backgrounds, or they're stylistically, their personalities match with one another. They have shared interests. Maybe they both like skateboarding, whatever that might be. That those factors, the literature suggests, are very important in terms of the success of a match. And likewise, it's important to say that that's a general conclusion, but really there's more research that's needed to try to sort out when factors like race and gender and disability are important, and when one factor might trump another factor in terms of providing the most effective match. And I think probably the general rule of thumb in my head after this review is that it comes back to what the goal of the program is. If the goal of the program is around a particular focus, say something like building ethnic or racial pride, then perhaps matching based on race and ethnicity is just way more important. Whereas if the program is focused in, say, science, it may not be so important. And likewise, the needs and interests of participants. We sometimes say that matching based upon status characteristics is important for who it's important for. And that requires us to talk with youth and mentors and to really try to sort out what is going to be most valuable for this youth given the time in this youth's life and the goals. And then the final findings I'd touch on at this point are, first, that developmental timing matters. For instance, when we've involved 14-year-olds in STEM mentoring, being matched with somebody who's out in a career and working for Intel doesn't work so well as it might for a 17 or 18-year-old who's just about to enter college and is really contemplating seriously the movement into a STEM career. That 14-year-old might end up learning from and having a lot more fun with a freshman in college versus a person who's out working in the field. And so thinking about developmental timing is important. The other point is that the literature suggests that individual mentoring, of course, is helpful and effective, but interacting in groups and e-mentoring, and Scott, I believe you'll be talking some about e-mentoring, that those are very, very important forms of mentoring as well, and that what we really need to learn more about is the conditions under which each type of mentoring is most valuable and how to combine them creatively to achieve whatever the goals are of the program. And then a final point to make, which is something I think probably we're all aware of as well on the phone, is that the fidelity of program is really important, and that's all about having clear goals for what the program is intending to do, recruiting mentors and mentees, being very transparent about those goals, providing orientation and training and ongoing support, and then equally important, or perhaps even more, having a program evaluation loop so you can get information that feeds back into being able to improve the program. And we find in the literature that studies that have been done on programs that have those elements suggest actually that mentoring is yield results suggesting mentoring is more effective. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next poll.
Great, Lori. I'll take it from here. Thank you so much to Lori and Joanne, and they'll be with us throughout the webinar to help answer any questions or participate in the dialogue. But before we turn it over to our next panelist, we just want to launch a quick poll. And we want to know how prepared your mentoring program is to involve individuals with disabilities. So take just a moment to complete this poll. Well, it seems to be quite the split across the board. It looks like the majority of you feel somewhat prepared. 35% of you are very prepared, and 23% of you have a ways to go. So we certainly have a lot to learn on this topic and ways that we can improve in the mentoring field. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Scott Bellman, who's with the University of Washington's Do It Center. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. As we look at the first slide here, I just want to tell you very briefly about the Do It Center here at the University of Washington. As mentioned earlier, the Do It Center has been around for 18 years, and the primary goal has always been preparing youth with disabilities for challenging academic programs and challenging careers. The very first grant that Do It received was from the National Science Foundation, and so of course we started in a world where we were looking at STEM fields for young people with disabilities. And we continue with funding from the National Science Foundation and have done so over the years, and we also have other funding from the state of Washington and some corporate contributors and some others. In addition to preparing youth with disabilities, we also try to facilitate change. So some of our projects look at other stakeholders like career counselors and advisors, and some of our projects also work with institutions to try to help colleges and school districts become more welcoming and accessible and facilitate and prepare youth to go on to college and go on to these challenging careers. About me, I received a degree in psychology from the University of Iowa and have a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. I've been working at the Do It Center for over 11 years, enjoying these mentoring activities and facilitating the research. And here in Washington, I'm the state coordinator for Disability Mentoring Day, which occurs every October. And over the years, we have sent about 400 youth with disabilities out into the corporate world to do mentoring with people in industry. Now, the reason I share this with you is because after today and also during our call, you're welcome to contact me at any time. I'd be more than happy to share what I know with you, and I hope you consider me and the Do It Center to be a resource well beyond today's call. On the next slide, I just briefly have a couple bullets about our electronic mentoring programs. The Do It programs have opted for email discussion lists over chat rooms, web-based discussion threads, and other modalities. And that's a very strategic decision, and I actually have a 1-hour talk that I give at conferences and so forth, which I can't go into that level of detail here. But the couple things I did want to share is we use email discussion lists because they are a push technology. And what I mean by that is if any one member of our electronic mentoring community sends a message to the community, that message goes directly into the email inbox of all the other members, and so it's pushed there. Now that's in contrast to like a web-based discussion forum, for example, where a student or a mentor would have to remember to go to a website, maybe enter a password or so forth, and then peruse some of the discussions and click on the one they want and engage that way. That's not a push technology. They actually would need to be, they would need to go there and do all those things to participate. And then another thing about the email discussion list is that we don't really have to schedule anything that we would have to do like if we were doing some kind of chat, internet chat or chat-based system. And so those who want to hear more about that, maybe people who are just setting up or looking at some e-mentoring options and trying to figure out how to do some of those things, please get in touch with me. I'd be happy to share with you what I know in that area and what we've learned over the years. Here at the Do It Center, we recognize and want to capitalize on the changing world in which we live, and social networking activities are very important for young people now, much different than the landscape looked 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. And we have student-driven Facebook activities now, and so we encourage our students to run a Friends of Do It page and have a lot of interaction on there, and so that we do have a presence on Facebook, and we can still maintain our email discussion lists in the way that we have in the past, because we really put our primary efforts there. On my next slide, I just have some bullet points about electronic mentoring, just a few things I wanted to share. We have a main discussion list with all of our mentors and our mentees. And as I said earlier, if any one member of our community sends a message and they use that discussion list, every member of our group will receive their message, and they will have a chance to ignore it or simply read it or read it and offer a reply. Our lists are closed, and so you need to be a project participant to join any of our lists. They're not open to just anybody. And for our mentors, we do background checks. We have a system for them to provide references and for us to check those references. And we do ongoing monitoring of our electronic mentoring with staff. And so, again, if anybody wants to learn more about those controls or some of the logistics of security and safety and so forth in setting up electronic mentoring, again, please call on me. Our mentoring, because it's in this group format, it supports both mentor and peer support. And so some of you may might be familiar with the term vertical mentoring chain. And what that means is simply that in our mentoring community, we have at the top of this chain industry representatives, successful people who have jobs out in the world, many with disabilities and many without. I would imagine below them are faculty at universities, advisors, project staff, and then as we go down the chain a little bit, we have people who have just graduated college and are looking for work, and then graduate students and undergrads and high school students and teenagers all the way down near the bottom. And the chain part of it is that any person lower on the chain here can receive mentoring from anyone above, and anyone higher up on the chain has opportunities to share their expertise and provide mentoring to people below them. And earlier, this idea of developmental timing was mentioned, and I think in this group electronic mentoring format, it's a great opportunity for the developmental timing because you have a lot of near peers and peers to kind of provide you with this encouragement and expertise and advice. And I think that fits real well with that idea of the good developmental timing and having some opportunities there. Also, as part of our e-mentoring, we have special topic subgroups. And so, for example, we have littler electronic communities that involve just our participants, for example, with vision impairments. And so we have a collection of lists on different topics. And so any given participant might be participating in 2 or 3 communities so that they can really tap into some specific things if they want to engage with just some specific people. But again, everybody is on our main e-community. One thing that we think is very important with our electronic mentoring is that we support it with in-person events and activities. And this was mentioned earlier as experiential activities. And so, for example, tomorrow, through our electronic community, I have invited everyone to a center here on the UW campus that does research in the area of sensory motor neural engineering. And they're going to meet a graduate student researcher, and we're going to have coffee and treats and so forth. And so we have found great value, as you can well imagine, in having in-person activities as well as through our electronic community. That's not always easy. Some of our programs are national in scope, and so in those, we really do need to focus on what can we do with our electronic community here, because it's hard to get a kid from Florida in person with a mentor from Anchorage, Alaska, for example. On the next slide here, it talks about a little bit of the research. In fact, 18 years of staff observations and research have given us some of these nuggets that we like to share with others. So in choosing electronic mentoring, you have this ability to communicate over great distances quickly and inexpensively. There are elimination of schedule constraints as long as you don't select things like chat rooms. You can communicate with more than one person at a time. Electronic mentoring reduces the initial impact of a disability simply because the people you're talking to and exchanging information with, they don't see your disability. It's invisible to them. And so it's just human beings talking back and forth. And although they can certainly share as much as they would like to about their disability or their challenges or their accommodations, which they do a lot of, it does reduce that initial impact that when you first are introduced to somebody, it's a human being. Technology can reduce the impact of communication disabilities as well. And so the way that we have set up our electronic mentoring, if someone is really slow at writing out their thoughts, or someone is really slow at reading a message, or if someone has a speech impairment, like really heavy stuttering, or maybe they don't talk at all, those things will be invisible in the electronic mentoring community because they can read and respond to these messages at their own pace. And when they're ready to send their email, others will receive it as a consolidated whole message. Again, electronic mentoring allows a dual role of mentor and mentee. We've talked a little bit about that already in the vertical mentoring chain, and provides a great mode for us to share resources and announcements. And some of the things that we announce are our in-person activities that we do quite often, and scholarships and internships and other things like that that we want our students to know about. My next slide talks about mentoring resources, and I really hope there's some things here that people on this webinar today can use. One thing I'd encourage you to check out is the online knowledge base that DO IT has put together with through some of our funding from the National Science Foundation that has supported some of this work. Some sample questions that are in our knowledge base. So if you go there and type mentoring into the search box, here are some questions that have answers in the knowledge base. What is the role of a mentor? What are tips for making online mentoring successful? What benefits do mentors get from a mentoring relationship? What is the benefit of electronic mentoring to students with disabilities? And so I encourage you to go there, check out the knowledge base, poke around. There are over 400, I think, question and answers and case studies and promising practices available for you to check out at your leisure. My final slide talks about some examples of other DO IT resources. We have a video that is called Opening Doors, Mentoring Over the Internet. And our videos are in the format of a train the trainer kind of thing. And so if you need to gather your staff around or some other colleagues and you want to talk to them about your vision about creating a mentoring program or building your program or making some changes, check out this video. It might be something you would want to use in a presentation to other people. We have some of our publications that you may also find helpful. One of them is our Guidelines for Mentors, and that is what we use with our mentors when they first join the program to give them some tips and advice on ways they can be effective with our students, and that is freely available for people to download and check out for themselves and view online. And we also have a pretty extensive book. It is called Creating an Electronic Mentoring Community, How DO IT Does It and How You Can Do It Too. And although we do sell some pretty green paper copies of those books, and they're pretty slick, I would encourage you to check it out online because the full version is free in PDF format over the internet. So you don't have to pay a penny. It's totally available to you. Again, my name is Scott, and I very much encourage people to contact me in the future if there's any question at all I can answer for you that we don't take care of today on this call. And I'm very honored to be a part of your webinar today, and I really thank you for giving me your time, and I hope I was helpful.
Great. Thank you, Scott. This is Sarah, and we actually do have a couple questions for you to answer today, so hold on for a minute. We wanted to start with a comment from Brendan, who was replying to a question or a comment from April that yes, it does seem to match up well with best practices for general matching and support. This is significant, I think, in helping reduce barriers and fear to engaging youth with disabilities in mentoring programs. So thank you, Brendan, for that comment. And now, Scott, we have a couple questions for you. Kate is wondering, how does e-mentoring accomplish the, quote, experimental learning, unquote, aspect of mentoring?
Yeah, sure. So the experiential stuff, I mean, that's where we get kids together. In our case, since we're promoting STEM, we get them into a science lab, or we get them to a pizza party with some researchers, or we get them into our office to sit down and have open office hours and connect with their peers and a couple staff people. And so, so the two really, electronic mentoring in and of itself doesn't necessarily offer the experiential pieces other than the exchange of information. And so the way that we orient ourselves is to view our electronic mentoring as a vehicle to promote and encourage students to come to our in-person events that we have that are often right here on the University of Washington campus and some places out in the community, such as Microsoft or other places. And so, yeah, the experiential stuff is more the face-to-face, in-person, hands-on, let's get in a science lab and do something together. And, yeah, we use our e-mentoring to facilitate and promote that to everybody in an efficient way.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we have one other question from Brianna, who asks, do the mentees access email through their own computers? How does having access to computers impact e-mentoring? I would guess a great deal, right?
Yeah, it does. When this program first started 18 years ago, I was not here yet. I've only been here about 11 years, but that was probably the biggest challenge was even for students who had computers, they didn't have email accounts, and there weren't even a ton of free emails like Hotmail and Gmail and Yahoo like we have today. That was a big problem, and which has gotten better and better and better in the last 18 years, as you can imagine. We have had the experience. I can't think of any student who does not have access to email in one way or another. The biggest challenges I think that I have noticed in my work is we have a program called PALS, which includes some students that are as young as 13 and 14 years old, and they sometimes need to use a computer at school or use dad's computer or something like that. So it depends on the population you're working with. I think if it's like an inner city population with socioeconomic group that's sort of struggling, and that group doesn't tend to have a lot of computer access, then that would be pretty important to kind of figure out how are we going to solve that problem so that these young people can log on and participate on a regular basis without needing to drive across town to the library or what have you. But the majority of our work, with our high school students and our college students, I haven't seen that as a barrier. In my experience, by and large these days with the population that we're working with, of students who they want to go to college, they want to engage in a career, most of them can find a computer somewhere, whether it's at home or at their school or at the library or a coffee shop or some other location.
Okay, great. And we have one more question from Cheryl. Any experience with working with students with disabilities that are under 14 years old?
With electronic mentoring, yeah, we go down to age 13, and the Do It Center has not done a lot of work with like middle schoolers and elementary age students. We have met younger people on occasion at events or like a sibling of one of our participants who also has a disability during our summer program. But we have yet to implement e-mentoring for below age 13. So unfortunately, no. But I do think a lot of the principles as far as the structure for setting up e-mentoring, the vertical mentoring chain, the complementation with the experiential activities and so forth would apply all the way down to the elementary age.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That might be a good question to pass it back to Joanne and Lori and ask both of you, as I know you're going to move into your recommendations. What about working with students with disabilities who are under 14 years old?
Yeah, I think in terms of particularly the literature that's out there, some folks may be knowledgeable of a couple of programs that work with youth with and without disabilities. Sometimes, one of the things about the earlier question about what constitutes a youth with a disability, and then some of our review of the literature is that there's a good likelihood that a number of youth and kiddos who are in other mentoring programs may have disabilities and likely do have disabilities. The research in the general youth mentoring literature and the general STEM mentoring literature has not really identified youth or asked youth about disabilities, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But there's a couple of programs that we reviewed for this monograph that did use e-mentoring, online mentoring, but they were based in schools. So it was with the teacher facilitating the online, so that they had the computers there, and the teachers were using that as an opportunity actually to help kids improve their reading and writing skills and their communication skills, and also helping to kind of construct the messages to the mentor and help to interpret those and kind of build them into the class exercises. Lori?
Okay, great.
I would just add that we've, Joanne and I and others have done, have created and then evaluated mentoring programs that have involved young people, certainly in middle school, with disabilities. Probably 11, maybe the lowest, just because we were focused on a middle school population, and really found, taking into account some of the things we talked about before, developmental timing and what's the purpose of the program, and kind of making sure that it really is tailored for the age range that mentoring of students with disabilities or youth with disabilities doesn't really take a different shape than it would at the high school level. I mean, it's those other issues that tend to, and I'm guessing there are probably programs on the call that are working with elementary age youth, and it's not, I think it's not so much that kind of status characteristic, whether it be disability or race or ethnicity or gender. It's that doesn't change so much as a function of the age. It's really how the program is focused and organized so that it's responsive to what those children and youth most understand and enjoy and benefit from.
And I think to chime in there, I think Lori is saying this. It's both the program in terms of the youth that are in, but it's also all of you, and I'm speaking to the choir here. It's really having that flexibility about mentor and mentee matching, that one youth may need different kinds of supports than another youth, and to be able to one, match a mentor who maybe can provide those kind of supports, whether it has to do with constructing emails or whatever that may be, and then to provide the staff support to that mentor to be able to help with those kinds of supports. So one program probably will not meet the needs of all youth and young folks, other than to again try to do that in a way that is as flexible as possible, so as many youth's needs are met as possible.
Great, thank you. Joanne and Lori, I believe we have a few additional slides about some of your additional recommendations and resources.
So one of the things I wanted to know, if you wanted to go through those slides, because they really kind of were encapsulated by the summary of what Lori did, and so they're kind of a reiteration of those, or whether you would think it was a better use of time to kind of open it up for questions and be able to have folks be able to ask us more questions, both Scott and Lori and I.
Sure, absolutely. I don't see any questions currently in our question box that we haven't addressed, so for those of you on the line, please take this opportunity to give us some additional questions that we can ask of our panelists today. April or Sarah, do you have anything else that's come in?
Yes, we have one question. I'm hoping that Kayla can give us a little more answer. Kayla was asking a question for Scott about how do you handle the in-person gathering logistics, but I think we need a little bit more information. So Kayla, if you can type in an example of what you mean by in-person gathering logistics. Excuse me, but we do have a question from Kate. From a research perspective, I'm wondering about the validity of grouping together all disabilities and the outcome of mentoring.
Well, this is Lori, and the first thing I would say, and this is reiterating something Joanne said before, in that I really think that it's very unlikely that any mentoring program, whether really even thinking about disability or not hasn't included young people that happen to have some kind of disability. You know, most disabilities are invisible, and they may not even come up in the context of mentoring, depending upon what the program focus is and what the mentor and the youth are doing together. So that would be my you know, my first thought about that. And then the other would be that, you know, we've is one of our recommendations it suggested that we would discourage, in most cases, programs from necessarily thinking that it would be important to cluster youth around disability or not having disability, and that really it's the overreaching goal of unless I suppose a program is specifically focused on that topic, but most mentoring programs are not, and so being able to address disability as a diversity issue is I think for me an important take-home message, and that would suggest that you know, you could have somebody without a disability, somebody who uses a wheelchair, and somebody who's got a learning disability that you'd never even know they had a disability, all in the same mentoring group or matched to mentors in a program with a particular goal. And if we address that as diversity, and as Joanne pointed out, we try to do the best job we can, you know, within the context of the resources that we've got to make matches that seem to make sense for individual youth and individual mentors, and we are clear and communicate to everybody what we're hoping will be accomplished, and we can offer support and training to mentors that should work just fine.
In the study that Lori and I did, from a research design, one of the things that we did was to randomly assign youth to 3 different groups: mentors with disabilities, mentors without disabilities, and then a control group. And then we made sure that we did stratified sampling so that students with similar types of disabilities were equally represented in each of those groups. So I think there's some, again, going back to that thing that we had talked about before in the monograph, need for more research, and that's one of our recommendations, is we need more rigorous research. That's one of the approaches that can be done to address Kate's issue. The other thing is that a fair number of the students in our project happen to have learning disabilities and ADD and ADHD and autism, and some folks had physical and sensory disabilities. And this goes to one of our recommendations, is that most of the youth really were much more interested in talking to the mentors, whether the mentors had disabilities or not, in terms of that strength-based and that activity, doing activities. So really wanting to learn about exciting STEM careers and learning about going to college and doing fun activities, and not so much focused on let's talk about disability. Now certainly many, if not most of them, wanted to have the opportunity to talk to some extent about that, but the vast majority of the time of these 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds really wanted to really get out to Nike and Intel and over to the engineering department at PSU and to the nuclear science thing over at Reed, and do those kind of things and really think about you know, what their future was going to be like and doing those fun kinds of activities. So you know, again, I think that going back to Lori's thing, you know, in a lot of ways the least salient, or not the most salient, characteristic of these youth, whether it's disability or other diversity issues, is their common interest in STEM.
Great, thank you. We do have 3 more questions here that I'm hoping we can squeeze in. The first one is, are there specific resources out there that include various STEM activities that are matched with developmental level or abilities to provide to mentors that specifically work with their mentees in community-based settings?
Scott, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I was just sitting here scratching my head. That's a great question about maybe some curricula that's available or just little activity modules and things like that. I'm not aware of anything like that off the top of my head. Maybe some of the other people on the webinar today might be able to share something about that. But it's certainly something we could look into and maybe post for participants.
Great. April, are you taking us to a resource that exists?
Yes, I am muted. This is, we were focused more on the research, but this is a resource that we have, that the Mentoring Partnership created a few years ago, called Wired for 2020, but this would be a collection of mentored resource tools that are focused on STEM. So it might not be particularly focused on youth with disabilities, but I think what we've learned from this research is that you know, a lot of the same findings are coming up for mentoring for youth with disabilities as they are for the general mentoring, typical mentoring population, whatever that means. But anyway, so here's a collection of some STEM resources that might be fun for mentors and mentees to explore together, and we'll include that on the forums.
Great, thank you. Scott, I think this question is for you. It says, do you use UDL when designing your virtual spaces?
Yeah, we have a technology specialist here. Actually, we've got more than one, but we have a gentleman named Terry Thompson who is nationally known for website accessibility and universal design sort of components embedded in technology. And yeah, so we have looked pretty carefully for our electronic mentoring about, you know, how do we do it in such a way that a person who's blind maybe and is using a screen reader, how can we best facilitate their participation? Or, you know, someone with a learning disability who wants to use a specific kind of computing tool. And we have found that our email distribution list system, along with some having Terry available for consultation with anybody who's having any accessibility problems, has been really great. And we feel pretty confident that the technology that we're using is really accessible to everybody who wants to participate. And again, that has fed into our choice of doing email distribution lists versus other types of formats and structures that we could have chosen.
Great, thank you. The next question is, the research that you did included mentoring for other underrepresented groups. Does STEM mentoring for youth with disabilities tend to be isolated from STEM mentoring programs for underrepresented groups in general? Lori or Joanne?
This is Joanne. The answer to that is yes. There's, you know, at least in terms of the research that has been published, there seems to be a tendency to have developed up to this point in time sort of a siloing effect, which is not surprising in terms of the way things are funded, and certainly where people's who are doing the research and developing the programs where their hearts are maybe at, but that there is a tendency to develop mentoring programs and STEM mentoring programs that are targeted to youth with disabilities, and then there are STEM mentoring programs that have been developed that have been specifically targeted to other underrepresented groups, including females, and which has been the most in terms of that non-disability group. A lot more focus, not surprisingly, has been on trying to increase the number of girls, females who go into STEM fields, and then a smaller number for ethnically and racially diverse groups.
And this is Lori, and that just opens up a really neat opportunity from the perspective of research and programs to be able to look at kind of proactively combining these groups and and examining, well, can we develop a kind of a universally oriented diversity-based model where we bring people together, and then what effect would that have on the different groups? And that could be examined from a research perspective and certainly from a programmatic perspective as well.
And I think, playing off of that, and as Lori had said at the beginning, I think some of the programs here in Portland and some other places that we've worked who do mentoring, do have a concern about being able to effectively serve youth who happen to have disabilities. And certainly one of the other concerns, and it's not a minor issue, is that if somebody does need accommodations, how are those accommodations paid for, if they're things like interpreters or more expensive types of things. But it really is, the research really shows in the whole field of disability and diversity and all of those things is really much going to, universal design of learning and full inclusion and really seeing disability as diversity. And so, I think it, really behooves all of us, to do, reflect what Lori was saying, was to really try to look at this as a diversity issue within the context of research, but also in the context of programs, and to reach out to programs like Do It or other programs in your community who know about accommodations, and working with folks with disabilities to be able to partner with your program if you are feeling like you may not be prepared to include students with disabilities in your mentoring program.
Great, thank you. We're running out of time, so I think I'm going to pass it over to Sarah. I believe she might have one final question for us, and then she's going to close us out.
Great, thank you, Amber. We had one question Kayla did type in and gave us a little more clarification. Kayla's question, this is a question for Scott. You mentioned that there are efforts to bring mentors and mentees together in person, but that this poses a challenge. If you can just address briefly how you address that challenge.
Yeah, I think in part of my comments I was saying that some of our programs are national programs, and so we ultimately can't bring people together because they're spread out everywhere from Boston to Florida to Alaska. And so that was, I think, part of what I was trying to say. For our local programs, our regional ones, we have one here in Seattle, and it involves electronic mentoring with a couple of community colleges and the University of Washington campus. And that's a challenge too, even when you're just local. It's getting people to come together. And I think that we always offer food and that kind of thing because that can't hurt, and we think about our timing and our location. But I think ultimately, people will show up if they get something valuable out of the event. And I think many of you know, what kids find exciting and interesting and valuable is when they can do some hands-on fun stuff. And in our case, that's hands-on fun stuff. That's science stuff. And so, if we're getting together, we almost always try to have a component of something that they can do or build or try or make that relates to the sciences. And, that will, in our eyes, hopefully encourage them to keep pursuing different areas of science because they find it fun and interesting and engaging. And so I guess my one comment would be for people struggling to get people together in person and to make that work is, to have activities where students can build or do or make something or try something with their own hands.
Great, thank you. And I was just listening to your advice, and it's a common challenge among any kind of mentoring program is getting people together, and we always definitely support the idea of introducing food and fun activities into that equation. So thanks very much for that. And just wanted to mention briefly, April did show up an additional resources slide. We did that question from Kayla. Kayla works with Partners for Youth with Disabilities, and they have a couple really great resources as well, a best practices guide and Mentoring 101, an introductory workshop for new mentors focused on mentoring youth with disabilities. So be sure to check that out, and thanks for your question, Kayla. So I just wanted to thank you Lori, thank you Joanne, and thank you Scott for joining us today and sharing your new research. We're very excited to feature what's happening on the cutting edge, or as we say in Silicon Valley, on the bleeding edge of mentoring research. Thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, we just have a couple last things to share. You will be getting their follow-up email with instructions on how to access presentation slides and the webinar recording, a link to the mentoring forums for all of the resources we've been talking about today, as well as a chance to continue this conversation. If you didn't have your question answered, that's a great place to go. And you will also get a very short 5-question survey that we would appreciate you answering. Our next webinar is coming up June 21st, the third Thursday in June. Better Mentoring for the LGBTQ Youth in Your Program, Stepping Up to the Challenge. So we're very excited to have two experts on this specific population. Registration is, I believe registration is available now. Is that right, April? We'll be sending you those links.
Yes, it is available now.
Yes, thank you. Registration is available now, and we are very excited to talk about that topic in June. So thank you again very much for joining us today. If you're interested in learning more about the collaborative and how it works, please stay on the line. We can field a couple questions, and if anyone has any last questions, you can stay on the line and we will answer those as well. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day.